welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David begins a series on the minor prophets with a look at the prophet Habakkuk. Let's listen.
Have you ever shown up to the airport and then received the dreaded news? Your flight is delayed. First by 30 minutes, then by an hour, and then all of a sudden, it's canceled. Now, I had this happen once when I was leading a high school mission trip of 30 students, 30 high school students on the way back from Belize. Now, the mission trip itself was great. We led a vacation Bible school with tons and tons of kids. We did several construction projects for a local church. It was wonderful, but on the way back, we had to stop through Miami Airport, the place where dreams go to die. And we were told your flight is delayed and we're not going to rebook you until the morning. And so I thought to myself, wait. I was picturing sleeping in my own bed tonight after sleeping on an air mattress for an entire week. I was looking forward to not being in charge of 30 high schoolers who by this point were quite tired and a little bit smelly. I wasn't prepared for another evening with them. And yet, I said, okay, we got to buckle down. We have to adapt to our new circumstances, find a hotel for us to spend the night in, find them dinner, and all of that. We can probably all relate to a time when we had a plan, and we thought that plan was going to work until something changed, and everything just kind of fell apart. The system that you depended on suddenly became very unstable. Well, that's the exact kind of feeling that the person that we're studying in Scripture today experienced. Yes, we are starting a new preaching series titled Minor Prophets, Major Impact. And today's minor prophet experienced a moment in life when everything felt like it was turned upside down. But before we get to him, let me ask you a more general question. Who are the minor prophets? I don't expect that you walked in today knowing that answer. Well, let me share that with you. There are 12 of them at the end of the Old Testament. So essentially the last 12 books in the Old Testament are these minor prophets. And they are not called minor because they are less important. They are called minor because their books are shorter in length. So we kind of like that, actually. That's kind of helpful. There are also 3 major prophets in the Old Testament. That is Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And they're not major because they're better. They're major because they wrote really long books. We're talking 50, 60 chapters if you were to read those major prophets. But right after them, we have the 12 minor prophets. So for the next 5 weeks, we will study one minor prophet each Sunday. And today's minor prophet might be the one with the most difficult name to pronounce, Habakkuk. Say that 5 times fast. Habakkuk. There you go. So here's what he experienced. He wrote in a time when the world was in transition. He wrote in the time period of 600 BC, so a long time ago, and the nation of Assyria had dominated the landscape for the better part of a century. And they had been cruel to God's people over that time period. But when our prophet is writing, the Assyrians are collapsing and the Babylonians are coming to power. Unfortunately, they come to find that the Babylonians are even more cruel than the Assyrians were. So God's people are kind of stuck in the middle between these two warring countries. This was a time of chaos, confusion for God's people. Habakkuk lived at the exact moment when everything that he thought was stable, politically, morally, spiritually, was falling apart. So, what does he decide to do? I mean, if his world is falling apart, what should he do? Well, he decides to have a conversation with God. And that's how the book of Habakkuk begins. So we're going to start in chapter 1, verse 2. These are the opening lines of his prayer to God. Habakkuk says, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save. So I reiterate, these are the opening lines of his prayer. And I find it so interesting that he doesn't ease his way into that prayer at all, does he? He doesn't start by saying, God, thank you for listening to me today, or God, I worship and I glorify your name. No, he erupts in absolute raw emotion. I mean, these opening questions, how long, God? How long am I going to see all this violence in the world and it seems like you're not listening to me? How long will I point to something that's going wrong and evil, and it seems like, God, you're not there? Habakkuk is lobbing accusations against God. And right away, I think this teaches us something really important about prayer. Habakkuk is authentically honest with God. Now, sometimes we might feel pressure to have prayers that are very polished or rightly worded. We might hold back and wait to talking with God until we feel like we have the exact right words to say. But what I'm learning from this is that God doesn't need the right words. God simply needs to hear from you. So even if you speak in anger, even if you're coming to God with more questions than answers, that's okay. The fact that you're coming to God is what is most important. So Habakkuk, he is upset, and he's willing to share all of his emotions with God. He tells God, the Babylonians are bringing pain and violence to this world, and we need your help. Now, that's just the opening line. Let's read to see what else he has to say, and I wonder if you'll be able to relate to these words just based on the violence and the chaos in our own world. Here's what he says. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. You see, the moral fabric of his society is eroding. He looks around at his world, and all he sees is violence. He sees conflict. He sees the law that's there to protect people is no longer doing its job. Justice is a word that no longer holds much meaning. So he looks around at all the bad things that are happening in his world, and he asks a simple question. Where are you, God? Have you ever wondered that? I mean, our world is really such a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place with so much love and so much joy. But I don't have to tell you that there's a lot of evil in it as well. There's a lot of things that you look at and go, that's making this world a much darker place. I mean, I found myself asking these same questions even this past week. This past week, I think it was a week ago, when in Louisiana, there were those shootings of the children. And I thought to myself, God, why? Why does this happen? Why do you allow such evil in this world? But what I want you to notice is that Habakkuk is not afraid to ask these questions. And we really shouldn't be either. I think the turning point in this book happens in chapter 2. You see, chapter 1 is full of these authentic, gut-wrenching questions about the state of the world. But then, in the beginning of chapter 2, Habakkuk says this. He says to God, I will stand at my watchtower and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what God will say to me and what answer I am given or I am to give to this complaint. Habakkuk is expecting an answer from God. He has laid out his questions, his really tough questions, and now he waits expectantly to hear from God. And he uses this great image to get his point across. It's the image of a watchtower. So I want you to imagine standing up on watchtower, and the person up there had one job. They were to gaze out on the horizon and look for any signs of danger, any potential harm, and they would be the first one to then alert the entire town down below that danger is coming on the horizon. So why would Habakkuk use this image of him as a watchman when he's having this conversation with God? Well, I think there's actually two reasons that he relates to a watchman. One, watchmen were very alert And two, they were willing to watch for a very long time. Now, let me break that down for a second. This is his posture towards God. He has asked his questions, and now he's telling God, and I'm going to be alert, actively looking for your answers, right? He does not ask these challenging questions in despair, going, okay, I don't know the answers, but I'm just putting it out there, and I know I'm not going to hear back from God. No, he's not sitting there passively assuming that he's never going to hear from God. I wonder, how often do we do that? Where we shoot up a question to God and don't wait for an answer because we don't expect an answer to come. Habakkuk expects an answer, and he's alert and looking for that answer, looking for signs of how God might be getting involved in the pain of his world. And he was committed to watching for that answer for a very long time, right? He did not assume that God was going to answer him immediately. He knew God would speak, but it wouldn't necessarily be on his timetable. What would it look like for us to adopt the same type of posture towards God? A posture of being alert, looking for God in this world, and being willing to look for a very long time. That question made me think of this example. Some of you know what it's like to have a child where that child grows up and you feel like they've kind of wandered from the way that you have raised them. The child perhaps has made choices that has brought you considerable pain, but you never stop watching for their life to make a turn, do you? A turn to the better. Every phone call, every text, every knock on the door, you're alert. You're ready. And you're in it for the long haul, aren't you? Weeks, months, years, it doesn't matter because they are your child. That's not passive waiting. That's hopeful watching. And that's exactly what Habakkuk is doing on the wall. So I ask again, what would it look like for us to engage with this same sort of attentiveness towards the presence of God in our world today? I wonder if we can be alert and watch for signs of God's movement, even amidst all the chaos and pain of our world. Be alert and ready to hear from God. And do you want to know something incredible? God answers Habakkuk. Right here in this book, God delivers his response to the prophet. So we have that now in chapter 2, verse 2, when we are told, then the Lord replied. Gosh, I get almost goosebumps just reading that. I love that we get to hear how God responds to the really challenging questions of this book. Now, we don't have time to read all of chapter 2, which is the response of God. But I encourage you to go home and read it this week. You'll be glad you did. It is a very interesting and nuanced response to these questions that Habakkuk shared with God. But for now, allow me to summarize them for you. So in response to these challenging questions, God promises that evil has an expiration date. So even though it feels like people can do evil without consequence, God promises that one day God's justice will come to our earth. And the way that God promises this is through delivering the 5 woes. Now, the 5 woes are specific areas of our world that God promises to bring justice. So it's like God looked at our world and said, yes, there are places that are broken. And here are the places that I know I'm going to bring my justice to the earth. So the 5 woes are exploitation, greed, violence, humiliation, and idolatry. These are still woes that I think we experience in our world today, don't we? One example comes from chapter 2, verse 6, when God says, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. So what's happening in this chapter is that God promises that these things that bring us woe, like the violence of our world, or like when people are exploited, that these things in our world are not permanent fixtures of our world. No, God promises to one day come and make all things right once again. So God spends the entire chapter pronouncing judgment on the current evils in this world. And then tucked into this chapter is amidst this vivid description is this beautiful little verse. Chapter 2, verse 4. God says, "But the righteous person will live by faith." Okay, this is really neat to me because God has spent the entire chapter talking about the evils of the world, but then just has this little line in there that says, but the righteous person, even in the midst of all this, will continue to live by faith. It's like God is saying, I recognize all the challenges that are happening in your life, but the righteous will continue to trust in me even through those challenges. This one little verse is quoted in the book of Romans, the book of Galatians, and the book of Hebrews. 3 times in the New Testament, they look back to Habakkuk and say, that's important. That's something that our audiences, hundreds of years later, they need to know about this as well. Why was it so important to them? Well, I think it's because it taught them to remain faithful as they too waited for God's deliverance. And they probably looked at their world and said, well, things are a little bit different now. I mean, we don't have Babylon oppressing us anymore like he did back then, but we do have Rome, and Rome is oppressing us. And so they're able to look at their world and say, there are similarities, there are challenges. And because of that, we want to be these faithful people. We want to be the people who remain faithful despite what's happening in our world. I think that's true, not just for the New Testament and not just for the Old Testament. I think that's true for our world today as well. We can point to things and say, yeah, there's still violence here too. There's times when people are being exploited. There are times when people revel in humiliation. In the midst of all of that, what does it look like to be faithful? What does it look like to continue to live by faith? So Habakkuk, he asked, how long, God? How long are you going to allow evil in this world? And God doesn't give an exact timetable. Instead, God just simply acknowledges the existence of evil and encourages us to remain faithful within it. So what do you think? Was he satisfied with this answer? Well, we get to find out because chapter 3 is his response then back to God. So chapter 1, all of his questions. Chapter 2, God's answer. And now chapter 3 is his response back to God's answer. And it is beautiful. And it is written almost like poetry. Here's what he says. Habakkuk says, though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. So Habakkuk, he's describing this really kind of sad and tough world, isn't he? It's a world where the fig trees are not blooming, where the crops are not coming forth. His livestock have disappeared. Just when we think that he is at the lowest point in his life, he's saying, and yet, amidst all of these struggles and pain, I will continue to rejoice in God. I will continue to remain faithful, even amidst all of this. How is that possible? How is this minor prophet from the end of the Old Testament able to remain joyful and to seek the goodness of God when everything seems to be going wrong? It's back to that little verse, chapter 2, verse 4. The righteous will live by faith. And so in faith, he says, I'm going to continue to find joy. And it's going to be joy not because of my circumstances and not because of what's happening out there, but it's joy in the Lord. Habakkuk doesn't say, I will rejoice when things get better. No, he says, I will rejoice even though my fields are not producing, and even though my livestock is gone. This is a defiant joy. Now, I'd like for us to practice that this week. I think that really is the take-home message of this first minor prophet. It's to face head-on all the hardship and challenges of this world, to be realistic about all that, but then to say, and I'm going to face it, with defiant joy. And the definition I give for that is finding hope in God in the midst of hardship. Not in the absence of hardship, but in the midst of it. So if you are to practice defiant joy this week, I think that means refusing to let the circumstances of this world make you cynical. It is choosing hope instead of outrage. It is practicing joy as an act of resistance. It is praying even when your heart feels heavy. It is choosing to give even when you're tempted to hoard. It is sharing kindness in the places that this world feels most harsh. Anybody can rejoice when the fig tree is in bloom, but Habakkuk teaches us how to rejoice even when it doesn't. Amen.
If you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook. This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.